There are some things in the world that are amazing. People or their achievements, art, science, philosophies, inventions. However, the amazing in the world, and in ourselves for that matter, is often found in the mundane, the everyday. The things we see or do that we take for granted. The amazing everyday, you could say.
The amazing everyday. Sounds good. You should use that.
The amazing everyday. Today, let's look at paint. Is paint amazing? Yes, we can look at the history of paint and how it has developed, why it has developed. But first things first, what actually is paint? Well, the official definition of paint is a coloured substance which is spread over a surface and dries to leave a thin, decorative or protective coating. Okay, cool, I get that. But what is paint? What makes paint paint?
Paint. So good they named it twice.
There are lots of different recipes for paint, and they have developed and changed over the years, but fundamentally there are three parts to paint: binder, pigment and solvent. The binder binds it all together.
Does it really, genius?
A substance like egg used to be used, and later oils. Nowadays synthetic resins are more common. The binder also enables the paint to adhere to the surface that it's applied to. Pigment, what gives it its colour. Ground up materials, often natural minerals, but as with binders, synthetic pigments are now more common. Solvent. This smooths it out, makes it more liquid and thinner, makes it easier to apply. Eventually, the solvent evaporates as paint dries.
Which is better than watching this guy, am I right?
Although drying isn't actually curing, which is the cross-linking of the molecules of the binder, which can take weeks or months or even years to fully occur.
The amazing weather.
How did it all kick off for paint? What is the history of paint? Well, let's have a look at the history of paint. Cave paintings. The first pigments invented or discovered were soils, rocks, animal fats, even blood, making a palette of mainly reds, yellows, browns and blacks. I think it's interesting that in these very early examples of art, all different types of art were created. For example, at the cave of Altamira, there are images of the animals and things seen around them.
Ooh, like aliens that visited them, I assume?
No alien paintings here, I'm afraid, but there's some pretty dodgy looking stuff around the world. That's for another day, we should look at that. As well as images of things in their environment, cave paintings often include handprints and stencils of hands, like at Cueva de las Manos. Could you say that was a type of self-portrait? It's certainly being aware of yourself and the link between you and your art. Then they are the more abstract type of cave painting, patterns and shapes. Just like with modern artworks, they're often more complex than just copying what you see.
How is it more complex? I could do abstract art. Easy.
Well, I think that would need a video on its own, but you can't just rely on representational images to get your ideas across. You've got to communicate your ideas in other ways. You could say that makes it harder, more complicated. But what was the point in doing any of these paintings back then? It's one thing noticing that certain materials colour a wall or your body, but why commit time to do it and developing it? If you're trying not to be eaten...
By a hungry dinosaur?
Well, no, humans and dinosaur, doesn't matter. But just trying to survive, to leave all that for a bit, to then make art, it must have been pretty important to you and your mates. Whether that's the idea that there was a belief that drawing a particular animal would bless the hunt for that animal, or other religious or spiritual reasons. But in a way, I think it's just as magical or wondrous to think that they, particularly really early on, might have just been messing about, playing with creating. Like, imagine being the first person to draw a horse. What have I just made? Is it real? What does this mean? Is this how real horses are made? Is something or someone drawing them? A god? Maybe art wasn't just important in religious ceremonies. Maybe the idea of art created the idea of religion. Farming and agriculture. Once humans developed more structure to their society, with the advent of agriculture and farming, merely surviving,
being eaten by the dinosaurs,
wasn't just the aim of the game. As that societal structure becomes ever more efficient, free time will have started being a thing, particularly as specific roles were developed.
Farmer's gonna farm, painter's gonna paint.
This really kicked up a notch once proper cities began forming, probably around ancient Greek times, 3000 BC-ish. With ever more desire and need to record information, pass on information and decorate.
A pretty thing is better than just a thing.
Indeed. The Renaissance. I feel like when we think of the Renaissance, paint had a real glory days time. If paint had a career highlight reel, the Renaissance would be it. The paint had moved on, and now instead of having spit or animal fat as a binder for the pigment, oils were now being used. But when I think about paint in the Renaissance, I think of paint as more of an item.
Do you mean paintings?
In this time before photography, this process, this skill, this item, was now more than just a simple visual representation. To paint something realistically was the only way to record of what something or someone actually looked like. In terms of passing on and recording information, to perpetuate human progress and development, a painting must have been pretty much top dog.
What about words, mate?
Well, yeah, to be fair, words, stories, they're pretty important. But with things like what people, places and stuff looked like, or making characters from those stories real, descriptions only get you so far.
A picture paints a house in words.
1,000 words.
Scusi?
A picture paints 1,000 words.
Which picture?
If you think of the many different ways of creating we have access to today, animation, photography, graphic design, even non-visual art forms, music, all of which lead potential painters, potential artists away from paint. Whereas really, for many centuries, painting was the main way an artist could be an artist.
So not just rich people could buy paint then?
Well, that's a different story, I suppose. For a long time, if you think artist, you think painter. In these times, paint was at the forefront of not just painting, but human creativity and art. Mass production. The 19th century and the Industrial Revolution was a real game changer for paint. If you think about the definition of paint, up to now, paint's thing has mainly been its coloured substance which is spread over a surface. But now, as technology advances, paint's protective qualities become just as appealing. As with many things, mass production and the new processes involved made making paint cheaper and more available. And so, naturally inventive minds,
And people wanting to make money.
came up with ever more variations and uses for paint. With the mechanisation of industry itself producing lots of things that need painting. Like a snake eating its own tail. Like a
teapot that makes tea, but it also drinks tea, or it dies.
Well, basically, the Industrial Revolution enabled the mass production of paint, but also needed paint for many of its new machines, structures and products.
Like a teapot that makes tea, but needs to drink tea, or it dies.
As with many things, without other modern developments, paint probably couldn't be what it is today. Transport networks allow paint to be available worldwide. Canning processes, new or better application techniques make painting more accessible and successful. Paint is at the core, but without many other things, it doesn't become exactly what we know it today.
Like a...
No.
Nowadays, there are lots of type of paint. Lots. Acrylic, metallic, enamel, primers, zinc-rich, wood stains, polyurethane, chalk paint, bituminous paint, anti-rust,
And Uncle Rust.
anti-climb paint, anti-slip paint, insulating paint, urine repellent paint,
What?
That's blue.
antimicrobial, on and on and on and on.
Fun fact.
Fun paint fact.
White marble statues from ancient Greece and Rome used to be brightly coloured.
Say what?
Bonus fact, when the Renaissance came around, they copied the classic look of these statues, which is why they too are all white. Future advancements. What does the future hold for paint? We're so far on in the story of paint that in my mind I'm thinking of paint as two separate things, two different products. The artistic origins of paint and the industrial coating that is everywhere. So closely linked and entwined are the path of paint and humans. Paint will surely develop as humanity develops. So integral are paint and coverings now to the making of things that as long as we have things, paint will be there. As coverings develop, what paint is becomes a bit blurry. Inks, dyes and stains must now all surely be considered paint's offspring. Will new materials pose a threat to paint? As we move towards a more unrenovatable, unrepairable world of pre-produced items and pre-produced cities, there will be less spaces and things that could benefit from a fresh lick of paint. Even now, you just can't make it look like it did from the factory anymore. It isn't a new trend for things to be more throw away and buy a new one, rather than fix up the old one, whether it's cars, buildings, furniture or machines. And I could think of this negatively, to be honest. I think a lot is lost with a more throwaway culture. If you know that you're the one to fix or renovate something, you're more likely to look after it. More motivation to look after things has got to be a good thing, right? I mean, mentally, societally. But there are, of course, positives as well, or we wouldn't naturally go that way as a society. And besides, even if we're not the ones painting things, giving something a fresh lick of paint and its descendants are at the heart of the manufacturing process in factories everywhere, heavily involved in making pretty much everything we make. And we're not the experts in applying paints and coverings, especially the more new, complicated ones. But they are, so maybe they should be the ones doing it. If we had to consider the future, we of course need to think about the digital world.
The metaverse.
Yeah, I suppose.
Virtual reality. Second life. Don't need any paint there. You can just do anything you want. Anything.
So much art is now digitally created, it feels more possible than probably ever to separate art from paint. And with the rapid development of AI, now like Midjourney or Dolly, not only is paint removed from the art process, but so too is the human.
Humans have been overrated for a long time, mate.
I'll fight for humanity against the robot overlords when the time comes, my friend, fear not. For nothing is more beautiful than the human heart. And boobs.
I do have a feeling that as AI conquers ever more corners of our digital world, more value and appreciation will be given to analogue processes like painting, with that added je ne sais quoi.
Jenny said what?
That je ne sais quoi of human creativity and production. When cameras overtook our ability to replicate reality, modern art was born. Human creativity found a way. What's the point in competing with an AI that can produce an image in seconds? If we really want to embrace AI into our lives, we probably have to focus on the things that they can't, like, you could say, picking up a paintbrush. Is paint amazing? Paint goes alongside human development, hand in hand with understanding of ourselves, the world around us, and the manipulation of that world. The course of the development of production and the use of paint is quite representative of the course of human development. We went from observing colours and materials to gathering colours we noticed and using what we found. We developed how it can be improved, how can it be made easier to get hold of, how can we make it cheaper or more efficient. This is what we humans do. You could easily replace paint with something like tools, for example, or transport, or loads of stuff.
Like what else?
Like loads of stuff. The difference with paint, though, is that essentially it's still a coloured substance which is spread over a surface and dries to leave a thin, decorative or protective coating, like it always was. Whereas an iPhone is not a flint axe,
Tools.
a rocket is not a horse.
Transport.
As we've mentioned, paint has developed, of course, but maybe paint's great development is its development of us. Paint's timeline isn't just a representation or a metaphor for human development. Paint is human development. Philosophically, artistically, industrially, scientifically.
Alphabetically.
No, that doesn't work. Unlike many other inventions, there isn't just one person to credit for paint. There is no Mr. Paint.
No Mr. Paint? Well, who do you think delivers all the paint on Emulsion Eve? The cock fairy don't make me laugh.
But think about the people who have benefited with the use of paint. Titans of industry and commerce whose products and services just wouldn't have been possible. The obvious example of artists who use paint for their creations and ideas. Although I do think that with this, there is to a certain extent an artist being an artist, regardless of their medium. I think of John Lennon's quote, "I'm an artist, man. Give me a tuba and I'll get something out of it."
Do the voice.
No, I can't do voices.
That's right. Can't do voices.
Painting was maybe just a vehicle that artists got in to utilise their way of thinking and living. And as we mentioned earlier, output was very much restricted by its time. Today, would Picasso be a YouTuber, rapper, content creator, animator? Maybe.
Be amazing, whatever.
On the 15th of November 2017, a bit of paint was sold for $450 million. It had just been mixed and put on a panel in a certain way by a certain person. Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci is the most expensive painting ever sold. Paint makes me think of one of the bigger questions we can ask as humans. Form or function? Beauty or practicality? What is the most important element of paint? Is it its decorative purpose, its colour, or is it its functional properties? Imagine that either property of paint doesn't exist. Paint is only ever, let's say, grey, or like a browny grey. Basically a horribly dull, boring colour. Of course, creativity finds a way. We find ways of harnessing colour from nature maybe, like finding pigment from minerals. That's paint. But then, what if paint didn't do anything but make something look better? All those things that are essential to our lives just rusting or rotting. How would we have to change our lives without the semi-permanence that paint provides to metals and woods, for example? What would we invent if we knew that things didn't last?
Your boat would sink, mate.
Like with many things, we want our cake and to eat it too. Obviously, form and function are important. Function is often the fundamentals, the making of things safe. Nobody is thinking about the colour of a bridge as they fall to their death through a rusted girder.
Wow, rather grim example.
Function is something doing something it needs to, irrelevant of the fluffy decoration of making something pretty. Surely aesthetics are the icing on the cake, but it still needs to be a cake. But then, taking that to its extreme, what a boring, passionless world. Form, beauty, aesthetics are what make life better, or more individual or personal. It makes things nice, or helps us understand things, understand ourselves. If things can't be nice, if life can't be nice, what's the point? Something might work, but to what end? To aid or sustain a life not worth living? The idea of this series is to look at something that seems so everyday that we've become desensitised to its amazingness, or something that is seemingly so simple that it's almost banal. I think I've failed with that in this first video in choosing to look at paint. Paint is not just a single product or item or invention. Paint, depending on your definition, is almost everything. There are so many things that simply wouldn't exist without paint. Not would exist but slightly different, but would not exist. Our greatest machines and buildings, our transport network, would be impossible either directly or indirectly without paint. I think it was probably a daft thing to choose to investigate as part of the amazing everyday, because it's like choosing something as broad as tools, transport or energy. Paint isn't just part of everything we do, it's part of everything we think or feel. Everything that makes us human, everything, I believe, can be traced back to paint in our hands onto caves. Over the centuries, every concept, literally, that a human can explore has been explored with paint. Paint would never not exist. As long as there is colour in the world and we can see it, I think we would have experimented with it and developed things that made it. I think everything always leads to paint. I cannot think of something right now that represents humanity and that has developed humanity better than paint. Paint is amazing. Because of paint, because of everything, despite everything. Be amazing, whatever.
Be amazing, whatever.